So for our third panel here, we have Path, Dzogchen Lives in 19th and 20th Century Calm. We're starting off with Leonard Foote, then we have Amy Holmes, Tegchung Darpa, and then Alexander Gardner. So we're looking forward to this panel. Leonard? Oh, and just a reminder, please turn off your cell phones. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I hope that everybody had a very pleasant lunch and that you are able to hear right now. Okay, so this talk focuses on the life writings of Adzom Drukpa, in particular, how these texts portray his relationship with Yeshe Tsogyel. Adzom Drukpa was a Tibetan Buddhist Lama, preeminent exponent of Dzogchen in his time, and founder of one of the most significant printing houses in eastern Tibet, which published Nyingma texts by luminaries such as Longchenpa and Jigme Lingpa, and as we heard earlier today, Rigzen Godem. Today, I'll explore a series of visions that occur in these life writings, starting with Adzom Drukpa's encounter with a lady in the sky who calls herself Tingbarma. She gives him instructions that reverberate throughout his life, advising him not to be a celibate monk, but rather to find a consort. Gendered language pervades these passages, both in how they describe the magical Tingbarma, as well as in how they describe the human woman that she advises Adzom Drukpa to find as consort. Tingbarma's role in these texts is profoundly ambiguous, yet as I will show, the life writings gradually reveal her identity as Yeshe Tsogyel. I propose Adzom Drukpa's relation with Yeshe Tsogyel is a central thread in the life writings. These scenes operate, to borrow a phrase from Sarah H. Jacoby, as Dakini dialogues, illustrating Adzom Drukpa's deepening relation to wisdom as he steps into his role as Dzogchen master. To supplement our understanding of how gender operates in these texts, I juxtapose these accounts of divine encounter with accounts of human women who knew Adzom Drukpa, including consorts, students, and other religious leaders. Putting these early 20th century Tibetan life writings in conversation with feminist scholarship, I raise questions about how to interpret gender and sexuality across cultural contexts. Adzom Drukpa's life writings include two main sources, an autobiography and a biography written by his son, Gyurme Dorje. The autobiography, Drupang Jetsin Lame Namtar Shasungma Jin Laptejin, is 92 pages long and was first published in 1926. The biography, Jetsin Jupe Wangchuk Rigzen Dodo Pao Dorje Namtar Kelsangiki Dungsel, is 252 pages long and was first published in 1945. Distinguishing these texts is important because they present distinct portraits of Adzom Drukpa and likewise distinct portraits of Yeshe Tsogyel. I begin with the autobiography, Shelsungma, or personal account. Notably, this text is organized chronologically, whereas the biography is organized thematically. Adzom Drukpa's encounter with the mysterious lady of the skies, Tingbarma, occurs very early in the autobiography, on pages 13 through 15. And just to give a little bit of quick context, in this part of the autobiography, Adzom Drukpa has just been held captive for 3 years by Gompo Namgyel in the middle of the 19th century in the Nyarong region, and he has just escaped from this trauma, violence, and war, and gone back to Adzomgar at the moment that he has this encounter. He undertakes a state of an intensive ritual practice that leaves him exhausted, and then finally, in a state where experience and dream are not separate, Nyam Dangmilam Machepar, he meets a girl who calls herself Tingbarma. The passage in my translation follows. Day and night by myself without rest, I made 1,000 complete long and short feast offerings. After midnight, on the 15th, exhausted, I slept a little. In a state where experience and dream were not separate, there was a woman in the sky, without support. She was wearing outstanding ornaments and clothes and sitting like a blacksmith. She explained very many of my own prior births and incarnation lines, but I understood none of the meaning of her words except for hazy whispers. Who are you? I asked. Don't you know me? She said. I am Tingbarma, the girl of Ngayapling. As before, I knew nothing of the meaning of her words. Now, did you understand that? She asked. I don't understand anything, La, I said. Again, she spoke. In the future, you need to powerfully reveal many treasure caches. The woman helper of that girl of Ngayap Ling also spoke a prediction verse. In the region of Lap, the father Sonam Rinchen and mother Jomatso both have a girl, Jomaki. On her right nostril, there is a lotus-shaped mole. If you meet her quickly, extensive benefit to the teachings and all beings will occur once you fulfill old treasures of before and reveal countless new treasure caches. With that, I woke up, opened my eyes, and saw the moon of the 15th day about to set on top of the mountain peak. This encounter with Tingbarma is a highly significant moment in Adzom Drukpa's autobiography, introducing and crystallizing many of the most relevant themes in the text. It is the first passage dealing with themes typically found in secret biography: dreams, visions, encounters with deities. Several things suggest Tingbarma is not an ordinary being. She appears in the sky, Namkar, which could also be translated in space. Even her name resonates with the sky, as the meaning of the first syllable, Ting, is azure blue. She floats without anything supporting her, Tenme, resting on nothing. She says she is from Ngayap Ling, a place beyond the human realm that includes the domain of fearsome beings known as Sunpo and the pure land of Guru Rinpoche. This location, along with the advice she gives about treasures and consorts, suggests that she is a Kandroma, or Dakini. Their meeting is ambiguous in several ways. The dialogue is full of questions. When he asks, "Who are you?" she responds with her own question. The narrative emphasizes his difficulties understanding her. When she talks about his incarnations, all he hears is whispering. When she says her name and where she comes from, he does not know what she means. And when she asks, "Do you understand?" he responds with respectful frustration, using la as a polite form of address, but insisting again he does not understand. Yet for all the ways the narrative highlights Adzom Drukpa's lack of understanding, Tingbarma, in contrast, speaks in certain and definite terms. She predicts major features of Adzom Drukpa's career, predicting his future as a treasure revealer, or tertan. Her predictions about treasure dovetail with her advice about consorts, as treasure revelation activities often depend upon the aid of consorts. As this ambiguous encounter suggests, the nature of the Dakini is complex, multifarious, sometimes frightening. Jan Willis writes, "The Dakini is, quote, at once the witch, the trickster, and wisdom incarnate," end quote. This range of qualities well characterizes how the Dakini is described in Adzom Drukpa's life writings. Though he feels the urgent need to follow her advice, on the way he wonders whether he has been deceived by a demon and turns back. Thus the connection to the potential consort Jomaki disappears. Years pass. In harrowing dreams that occur in the subsequent pages, Adzom Drukpa sees multiplying girls and women in visions who mass about as plentiful as insects. His guru Pema Doodle advises him to find a consort, yet when Adzom Drukpa does not take his advice, the visions continue until Pema Doodle helps perform a ritual known as the welcome reversal of the skygoers. Adzom Drukpa's body goes rigid like a rock and he's carried about by his armpits. The ritual is followed by another night filled with frightening dreams of, quote, pleasant, beautiful women who were very horrid, put together with women that impersonate skygoers. The entities, quote, showed me their buttocks and genitals, kuptang tsinma ranglat tsenne. The vision ends as follows with a passage on page 28. They went like birds flying in the floor directions of the sky. Sometimes all of them were in the corner. It was like they had the power to shake the ground with their wailing. Again, they went away. Finally, all of them dissolved in unclear directions into the expanse, and I awoke in a state that was spacious and not fixating. The passage contains the thread of delusion these entities might be impersonating Kandroma. Yet the vision is also marked as sacred. Immediately after this vision, Adzom Drukpa's teacher, Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo, appears for the first time and instructs him to take a consort, thus demonstrating that the primary motivator behind these male human gurus is Yeshe Tsogyel and her advice to find a consort. All of the quotations I have shown so far come from the autobiography, but let us move now to Gyurme Dorje's account of his father's life. Whereas Adzom Drukpa's autobiography does not explicitly refer to Tingbarma as a Kandroma in the passage that describes their initial meeting, in contrast, Gyurme Dorje identifies her explicitly as a Dakini on several occasions and even identifies her with Yeshe Tsogyel. Like I mentioned before, this text, Gyurme Dorje's, is not chronological. It is organized thematically. And so whereas in the autobiography, All of the material with Tingbarma and the frightening Dakini occur in the first third of the autobiography, interspersed throughout. In contrast, in Gyurme Dorje's biography, it all occurs within a sixth section, which is labeled The Yogic Discipline of Tsogyel Showing Her Face, or Seeing the Face of the Queen of Space, Yeshe Tsogyel. One effect of this structural difference is that within the autobiography, these events occur when Adzom Drukpa is a young man, and so there is kind of a feeling of a coming-of-age story. However, at this point in Gyurme Dorje's text, he's already gone for over 100 pages about Adzom Drukpa's amazing activities, and so there's less a feeling of suspense or fear that accompanies these passages. And yet, doubt and ambiguity continues to suffuse the narrative. That was the introduction to the section. When you look at the encounter with Tingbarma, many of the sentences are entirely the same, but when you look at the exceptions that Gyurme Dorje adds, you see the sentences where Yeshe Tsogyel is identified. You see Adzom Drukpa discovering conviction in the thought that this was Yeshe Tsogyel. And following the prediction about Dromaki, the text remarks, certainly, that girl is the emanation of Tsogyel. However, while the text expresses more detail and certainty as to Tingbarma's identity, Gyurme Dorje also expands on apparently negative aspects more briefly mentioned in the autobiography, such as the thought haunting Adzom Drukpa, the fear that his experience may be due to demons or delusion. In general, there is no point to going to merely that long-distance place for the sake of a woman. In particular, what if that prophecy is the deceptive bait of a demon? Such conceptual thoughts of not searching arose in his mind, and the auspicious connection disappeared. These passages indicate a highly complex attitude towards women, whether human or divine. On the one hand, women are associated with negativity in Adzom Drukpa's mind. Yet crucially, these thoughts are depicted as an error on Adzom Drukpa's part. While the rhetoric in these passages mirrors misogynistic language seen elsewhere in Tibetan Buddhist literature, this dismissive attitude is seen as inauspicious. A major development in these narratives, then, is how Adzom Drukpa learns to recognize Yeshe Tsogyel as wisdom disguised. I'm going to switch gears slightly at this point and examine far too briefly how Adzom Drukpa's life writings depict not a feminine deity, but rather human women. Notably, with the exception of the consort Dromaki and her mother, these kinds of passages are usually occurring elsewhere in the narrative. Yet it is important to contextualize analysis of Yeshe Tsogyel with analysis of how human women are depicted. Feminist scholarship has long rightly noted a contrast between how religious traditions construct the category of woman in human versus divine relations. As Yancy Klein pointed out nearly 40 years ago in a 1985 essay, Primordial Purity in Everyday Life, Exalted Female Symbols and the Woman of Tibet, divine entities like goddesses are often held as sacred, whereas human women are accorded less esteem. As Sarah H. Jacoby writes, quote, Dakini's ubiquity in Tibetan religion stands in stark contrast to the relative scarcity of human women in Tibetan historical records and Buddhist hagiographical literature, end quote. Of course, as Jacoby's book demonstrates, this relationship is not necessarily one of dichotomy or contradiction, as many human women have the name Khandro or are recognized as Dakini. Scholars have often pointed out how women are underrepresented both as authors and subjects of Namtar. This is a very frequently quoted sentence by Janet Gyatso and Hannah Havnevik. Quote, women are rarely discussed in historical writing at all, except for the briefest mention of someone's mother or consort, who not infrequently is nameless or referred to only elliptically. In support of Gyatso's and Havnevik's point, Adzom Drukpa's Namtar often lists people at teachings, and many of the names appear to be men's names, although gender-neutral names and lack of contextual information sometimes makes this surmise tenuous. Many of his most famous teachers were men. When you look at short biographies of Adzom Drukpa within collections, most of these collections are devoted to the stories of men's lives. However, in contrast to Gyatso's and Havnevik's generalization, a limited but significant number of women are indeed mentioned by name in these Namtar. The narratives include several accounts of women, including wealthy and politically connected patrons, students, nuns, regional queens, daughters, mothers, foster mothers, lama, ritual experts, colleagues, and consorts. Further, several writers and teachers cited in feminist approaches to Tibetan Buddhist studies as a counterexample to male prevalence were Adzom Drukpa's associates. Sadly, Often, even in these cases, Gyatso's and Havnavik's point stands because while these women were his associates, they are not always mentioned in the life writings or mentioned by name. On the other hand, sometimes Adzom Drukpa gives extensive accounts of women whose stories, to my knowledge, have not been discussed in contemporary scholarship. So I have created a little bit of a chart showing some of the women who are mentioned in Adzom Drukpa's Namtar and how their depiction matches Gyatso's and Havnavik's thesis. And I'm probably going to have to move fairly quickly through this. The biography describes Sakya Jetsunma Tajin Wangmo. At a crucial point in the biography, the transition between describing Adzom Drukpa's ancestors and his own life. She quizzes Adzom Drukpa about whether he's a Geluk or a Nyingma Lama. Notably, according to Elizabeth Bernard's scholarship, Adzom Drukpa must have met Sakya Jetsunma in the latter part of the 19th century as the central Tibetan government consolidated control in Kham. This political context clarifies the implications of Sakya Jetsunma asking Adzom Drukpa which Buddhist tradition he belonged to and positions her as a religious and a political leader. Hlundrup Tso was one of Adzom Drukpa's direct disciples and Namkhai Norbu's grandmother. Her short biography of Adzom Drukpa might be the earliest of any of the biographies of Adzom Drukpa. It is even earlier than Gyurme Dorje's, and it is the first one that was recognized in Western scholarship, as Elizabeth Stutchbury wrote in 1994. When describing Adzom Drukpa, she said, quote, "The only known biography for this great master came from an invocation written by a female disciple after his death," end quote. Hlundrup Tso's corpus of writing also contains biographies of female masters, which is very interesting. Sadly, she is not mentioned by name in Adzom Drukpa's Namtar, so it's a bit of a win-lose. Ayu Khandro is another example of a student of Adzom Drukpa's who's often cited in feminist scholarship. She was one of his students, but again, sadly, she is not mentioned in the life writings. Another example is Dechen Choki Wangmo, who is a Bun treasure revealer. And as Peimatsu and Sarah H. Jacobi point out, she wrote one of the first collections in Tibetan writing of stories of women's lives. But again, sadly, although she was his student, she is not mentioned in the biography. And then, lastly to mention among this list is Sarah Khandro, who was summoned to Adzomgar near the end of Adzom Drukpa's life. Her testimony seems ambiguous in that part of their relation seems to reflect patriarchal relations in that she is summoned to Adzomgar, but other aspects of her description seem positive. She is not mentioned by name within these life writings, but she is mentioned. The autobiography describes, quote, "two authentic consort women coming to Adzomgar in order to prolong Adzom Drukpa's life." These two women are unnamed, but one of them must be Sarah Khandro, who wrote about meeting Adzom Drukpa under such circumstances. So these are all examples of stuff described in English language scholarship that are mentioned in Adzom Drukpa's Namtar, some or not mentioned but were known to associate with him. There are many other examples of women who are mentioned in the text who I have not found other information about. One example, there's a reference to among his patrons, the elder and younger daughters of the king of Upper Hlodruk, or Bhutan, the Gyatchakla king, Jikjil Dorje, and his daughter, Nordzing Wangmo. In this case, women are connected to their male relatives. Another example describes Sonam Somo, the lady of the ruler of Valdege. Notably, in an inversion of Gyatso's and Havnavik's thesis, her husband's name is not mentioned, but she is mentioned, and the autobiography praises her generosity in fundraising for Adzom Drukpa. One biographical passage lists 7 women practitioners among Adzom Drukpa's students. These are Khandro Chewa Gyatro Sangmo, Khandro Tashi Thlamo, and her daughter Mingyur Peldron, Chime Wangmo, Sonam Chudron, Kelden Wangmo, and Wangchu Klamo. This constellation of names does not have much detail, like many of the other lists of students in the biography, but it shows a presence of women among Adzom Drukpa's students, patrons, and associates. Okay, coming towards the end. One of the most substantial accounts of women within the biography describes a young woman from a ruling family who receives Dzogchen meditation instructions at which she excels. And here's the translation. At the end of Ox year, 1913, Sonam Wangmo, the younger queen from the region of Chakla, came specially here to Adzomgar when she was 20 years old, and so I instructed her in the foundational Dharma practices. When I explained the refuge vows and so forth, she developed extremely great renunciation and world weariness, so that at night she just could not sleep. I guided her chiefly in the main practice. At the time of searching for the three modes of thought, arising, resting, and going, her genuine understanding and experience of cutting through arose without being necessary for me to point out the nature of mind. Then, before the extensive sorting out, she established direct crossing. Once more, she developed indescribable renunciation, wariness, and trust. In the presence of Dzogchen Ken Rinpoche Tupten Ninjak, she received well the vows of the layperson and novice nun. Then she committed to go to a hermitage in Dartsedo and practice her whole life. The narrative depicts Sun Mwangmo as a gifted practitioner. Adzom Drukpa emphasizes her sharp faculties, saying she needed little instruction. Rarely do Adzom Drukpa's life writings focus on one person's progress and meditation with such detail. This account is a counterexample to the generalization that Tibetan women's religious practice is rarely seen as relevant, as in Janet Gyatso's statement, quote, tradition still almost always perceives the female as primarily a vessel for or aid to the male practitioner, end quote. Notably, the autobiography says Sonam Wangmo has qualities only otherwise mentioned with regard to Adzom Drukpa as a young boy. When he went to study with his uncle and monks, he starts crying when he learns about impermanence and they accuse him of missing his mother. Given that he's criticized for crying for his mother in a male-dominated milieu when he develops world wariness, it is interesting to note that this wonderful quality he cultivated in childhood is next noticed, in the context of a woman practitioner. These various passages about women in Adzom Drukpa's Namtar, some positive depictions and some not, suggest, as B. Shearer puts it, how Buddhist traditions feature, quote, surprisingly pragmatic and inclusive, as well as discriminatory and hostile paradigms, end quote. One letter he wrote to a colleague, Tokten Shakya Shri, as mentioned by Amy Holmes' Tagjung Darpa, suggests that his friend find a consort between 16 and 21 years of age. In order to find out what these women's experiences actually were, I think it has been demonstrated the best way is to turn to their writings if available. Most of the short biographies of Adzom Drukpa do not mention his relationship to Yeshe Tsogyel. The one exception is Masters of the Nyingma lineage, which does have a little brief aside, which is very nice. However, as scholars such as Jacobi, Bessinger, and Janet Gyatso discuss, Tibetan life writing frequently features conversations with Khandroma as a core part of telling the story of a particular person's journey along the path. Adzom Drukpa's Namtar can be situated with regard to these Dakini dialogues. Sometimes these relationships seem to destabilize notions of gender. An example of this is when he's describing his teacher Jamgon Kongtrul, who takes on the appearance of the tantric deity Dorje Naljorma for a long time while teaching. And there's one other prophecy in the Namtar that I'm not going to have time to go through, but one of the key details here is that one of his prior incarnations was known for wearing moche, or women's necklaces. This passage was pointed out within the first hour of Lama Tenzin visiting Rice to explain these Namtar before I'd actually read them. And I've been trying to sort through in the years since then how exactly gender is operating in these passages and what is the relationship, if any, between the woman in the prediction and the actual experience of woman in an Adzom Drukpa's milieu. And to conclude, Adzom Drukpa's close connection to feminine figures is a substantial theme within the autobiography and biography, both in terms of detailed accounts of visionary women as well as accounts of human practitioners. Not only do visions of Yeshe Tsogyel constitute the first and most dramatic visions of the autobiography, she has an even deeper relationship to Adzom Drukpa. She can be understood, according to certain modes of tantric philosophy, as not separate from the practitioner. Adzom Drukpa's relationship with Yeshe Tsogyel is a relation of devotee and deity, but also about the practitioner's relationship to themselves, as is demonstrated in that Yeshe Tsogyel is listed among Adzom Drukpa's prior incarnations. Examining Adzom Drukpa's relation with Yeshe Tsogyel, as well as the various human women described in and around these life writings, offers a more complex picture of the complex dynamics of gender and sexuality in this early 20th century Dzogchen context. Thank you.
All right, we have time for one question, I think. Just if anyone hasn't asked one yet. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you so much. My question is about also different titles in women figures. Because one very important teaching of cultivating compassion is to realize everyone to be as your mother. as once in a lifetime being your mother. And it doesn't matter what gender and sexuality you're born into. If you're born, you are having a mother. So I wonder, like, I guess the relationship between very man-dominated also and in those scriptures, how their relationship with their mother to be like, but also how in autobiography, especially mothers who have had kids and how they are in relation with their kids. Yeah, it's not like so related, but I just keep thinking about people have been born.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll answer really, really briefly. So first of all, just on the point of parents, one thing that's interesting is that he also doesn't name his kids in his namtar. So that's interesting. And then on the mother, it's really, really sort of complicated, and it depends on who he's talking about. So his mother, for example, he describes in these glowing, wonderful terms, how amazing she was. She was a great Dzogchen master, all of that. But then on the other hand, you have his stepmother or foster mother, Mayar, and she's described as kind of imposing these like what they call stains of the womb, Nyelkijima. And so that's an example of where there's kind of this bifurcated picture where you have this mother maternal figure that's very elevated, but then you have this idea of ritual impurity as kind of a threat that is described. On the same time, when he's describing his stepmother, he basically says, yeah, some people thought that was impurity, but for me, it wasn't a problem. So it's again, a very kind of a complicated attitude towards the surrounding misogynistic ideas that might have been in the culture at the time. I hope that answered.
Thank you.
Thanks.